Hi, and welcome to The Wicked Truth. Today I wanted to talk to you about this book and the author, Nassim Taleb. I first came across Taleb's books when he got really famous for writing The Black Swan. And I got a copy of The Black Swan, and I don't think I made it through more than half of the book. His writing really kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I felt like he was being really pretentious, using large words, vocabulary, trying to kind of show off in a way of a French intellectual or something like that. And I really wasn't too impressed by it, and I put the book down. And that was years ago. I think, if I'm not wrong, looking at here, The Black Swan was first published in 2007. So I must have got the book around then. I usually buy books as soon as they come out. And yeah, as I said, I wasn't too impressed by it. After that, I bought Anti-Fragile, which is another book of his. And again, that was another book. I read through maybe the first chapter, didn't really see the point in it, and put it down. And being the sucker that I am, his latest one that was released this year, Skin in the Game, it's actually a beautiful book. I just like the look of it, and it's probably why I bought it. Thought I'd give the guy another chance. And this is the book which really, maybe there's some change in me. I really fell in love with this book. It's got to be one of my favorite books that I've read in a very long time. It's really a book about how to spot bullshit. All of Taleb's work has been about studying risk, uncertainty, and how to deal with what he likes to call fat tails. A fat tail is essentially, if you know anything about probability distributions, you've got your normal distribution, and it kind of looks like a bell. Sometimes it's called the bell curve. And what we're interested in the bell curve is on these tail ends where things are improbable, where improbable events happen. And what Nicholas Taleb has done for his whole life, he was a trader in New York. And what he did was base all his trading upon trying to look at what happens at improbable events, and then basing his trades on highly unlikely events, sometimes called black swans, and that's why a book's called Black Swan. And using those events for making money, essentially, by correctly assessing probabilities on the tail end, whereas other traders normal probability theory leads you kind of to ignore them as outliers. But what Nicholas Taleb was kind of saying is these outliers are actually more important than your average. So this is the counterintuitive thinking that Nicholas Taleb kind of takes the reader down, and he starts to explain, and you start to realize why improbable events that happen infrequently are actually more important than your average events that happen all the time, which are a kind of what you could say, things that happen in the Overton window. That's in the window of discussion, in your window of view. You tend to think of the normal things that happen, and most people plan their lives around what normally happens. But then you get events that people don't predict. For example, Trump winning the American election. You had people like Nate Silver and other statisticians producing all kinds of theories using past data, etc., giving him a 2% chance of winning. But Trump was a black swan. And the black swan event is far more important than all the kind of normal other events that come across. Other examples are like massive stock market crashes. So one of the examples he uses in the book is called the Bob Rubin Trade. Bob Rubin was quite a famous Citigroup banker who famously got about $126 million when he left the Citigroup. What I guess the shareholders of Citigroup and all the customers didn't know was that he had taken quite heavy systematic risks, which later on led to, I can't remember exactly what it was, whether it was a collapse or whatever else. The risks that he had taken at the time did not work out. And the customers and the shareholders of Citigroup lost out. Ultimately, I guess the government bailed Citigroup out. I don't know the exact details. The point is that very often, and this is where skin in the game comes in, what Taleb is talking about is those who take the benefits should also take the risks. That's what skin in the game means. And what he argues in this book is quite a lot of the problems we face today in the modern world is there's been a divorce between people who take the benefits and people who take the risks. One of the bits where I guess him and I were in the same length before I even heard of his... He came up with this beautiful terminology called the IYI, the intellectual yet idiot. And I had come up with something over the last couple of years, which I've called the fake intellectual. And I think we're talking about the same thing. The intellectual yet idiot is essentially the guy who uses his credentials. You know, we're talking about, I don't want to use names here, but one that particularly comes across to me is someone like Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins. Highly credentialed, extremely eloquent, far more eloquent than I, better language, etc., mesmerizes crowds. They've got a ton of facts behind them, and they use their intellectualism in all the ways, except it's really, the conclusions that they come up with are plainly idiotic if you really sit down and think about them. And this is the class of people who are quite divorced from what they're talking about. They talk about things that really they have no risk in. They have no skin in the game. And our political classes, etc., our elite banking classes, they are often taking risks on behalf of other people while reaping the rewards, which is often, if I'm not wrong, I think is it capitalism on your gains, so you gain from your gains, and socialism on your losses. So the public take on the losses, and you take on all the gains. So this book, in fact, goes very deeply into this subject. It goes, deep into our history, from Hammurabi's Code, the Golden Rule. He talks about the old. He's from Nicholas Taleb is from Lebanon, so he knows the Levant and the Middle East quite well. So he goes deep into our history there, where many of our ancient rules were actually heuristics that took into account skin in the game, and whereas our modern world, we've kind of left it behind a little bit, and he diagnoses that as a cause of a lot of the problems that we have. One of a good example, for example, the Golden Rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's from Matthew 11:12. But the Hammurabi's Code, which is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So we're talking about symmetry here. And skin in the game is about symmetry. And when you have massive asymmetries, you start to end up getting into trouble. Another quite interesting insight in the book is what Taleb calls the minority rule. Now, the minority rule is quite interesting because in typical conversation, by normal rules, we tend to understand that the majority tyrannizes the minority. But often, as Taleb explains extremely well during the book, it's the minority that actually ends up terrorizing the majority. And the way they do that is extremely well explained, and I don't want to go into it. I think you should read the book. But a similar intuition that I had is it's like saying, imagine you have a really beautiful swimming pool, and someone puts a turd in one corner of the swimming pool. Uh, it's a small event, it's a small minority thing happening in the corner there, right? But yet everyone gets out of the pool. Because depending on the situation, the minority can be extremely important. But he comes up with much better examples than that. So what a lot of what Taleb does in this book is he takes you through various different dimensions of life, from medicine, how doctors behave, education, exercise, how you eat, what your teachers say, how the law works, the judicial system, etc. And he applies this filter and this analysis of skin in the game and looking at who's taking the risks, who's taking the benefits, and he lets you look at how the world works from this unique perspective. And he's done it in a really, I feel, honest way. I feel he's done it in a way that will really give you something more in life as you go through life. You start to look at what really matters, and how ordinary events, the events of everyday life, can be actually upturned by the massive tail events, and how you can start looking at these improbable events and see how the improbable is actually affecting your everyday life, and allows you to stop ignoring improbable events. And it's this ignoring of improbable events that leads to grand errors. The kind of errors where, you've got all the economists in the world coming out and saying, how did we not see the crash coming? Or something as silly as that. Or not able to see, for example, why immigration, in the way it's happening around the world, while it might look like minority events are happening, that it's a small flow. Oh, what's 1 million people gonna do in a country of 80 million Germans or something? It allows you to see past simple logic, to look into the higher level logics, the second order logic, third order logic. Is there a third order logic? Whatever. But you know what I'm saying, the higher dimensional thinking that allows you to stop discounting all the things that you have been discounting. I don't know a better way of saying that. What I'm trying to say is, this book is a great ticket out of your normal thinking. And, unless you want to be a moron for your whole life, I really suggest you get this book, and drop some of the other ones that you may have been considering. Because this is another diamond in the rough. It gets Wicked's 100% approval. So I hope you enjoy the book. Let me know what you think of it. All right, take care. Bye.